why is this happening? Like, what did I do? The way we're eating is causing some of these symptoms. We might feel like, oh, my body hates me. My body's always doing this, blah, blah. I'm like, listen, your body is speaking to you. When people have cravings, they often may feel something like, oh, I feel guilty. I feel ashamed. I have no willpower. Like, I'm so weak. I'm like, no. It's not your fault. Sugar is everywhere. How I'm eating is then in turn affecting how I'm feeling. I was like, whoa, this is fascinating. I went into like a massive deep dive into all of the scientific studies about glucose that I could find. I just went really, really, really deep. I discovered that...
What is glucose? Now, in my brain...
Yeah, tell me what you think.
Which is a slightly undeveloped brain on this subject matter. I've just always thought of it as sugar.
Yeah.
So I've just thought of it as the sugar I eat is turned into this thing called glucose. And then the glucose runs around in my body, in my blood, and seeps into everything.
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty good,
thank you,
like high level definition. And I think that's what most people who know a little bit about the topic think. So let me explain so you know exactly what it is, because that definition, while it's what most people think, it's actually a bit incomplete. So I'm going to give you like the 101 basics. Please. So you understand what's going on.
Thank you. Explain it like a 10-year-old.
Absolutely. So glucose is your body's favorite source of energy. Every single cell in your body uses glucose for energy. So, right now, both of our heart cells are using glucose to pump. Your brain cells are using glucose to think and speak. My, hand cells are using glucose to move, etc. So every part of your body uses glucose for energy. It's really, really important. And the main way that us as human beings, we give our body this important substance is through eating foods, and specifically through eating two categories of foods. Starchy foods, so that's like bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, and sweet foods. Anything from your favorite cookie to a banana to a Coca-Cola, anything sweet. So starchy and sweet foods contain glucose. And when we eat them, the glucose is given to our body. So now you might think, okay, I want energy, right? I want to give my body as much energy as possible,
great.
Right?
Yeah.
I want to feel great. I want to have energy. So you might think, okay, I should eat as much starchy and sweet foods as possible to give my body as much energy as possible.
The cookies are good for me.
Well, this is where the whole logic thing breaks down. It's a bit like plants. So let's say I go on vacation and I'm like, Steven, can you please take care of my house plants? You'll be like, of course, Jessie, yeah, my pleasure. I would love to help you. So you would go to my house and give my plants a little bit of water, right? Because the plants need some water. But if you gave the plants too much water, they would end up drowning and dying. And I would come back from my vacation, all my plants would be dead. So the plant got a bit too much of a good thing, and that caused issues. The human body is the same. Some glucose is good. Too much glucose causes all these issues. And most of us are eating in a way that gives way too much glucose too quickly to our body. And that's why we feel all these symptoms.
So what's going on at a cellular level when I flood my body with glucose?
So there are three sort of main processes that I want to tell you about on this topic. So when you flood your body with too much glucose too quickly, what happens is what I call a glucose spike. So a glucose spike is just simply a sort of rapid increase in how much glucose is in your system. So it goes, if you have a glucose monitor, you can kind of see it. It goes like, whoop, it just goes up really fast, the concentration. And so the first thing that we need to look at is your mitochondria. So your mitochondria are like little sort of oval organelles inside of your cells, and they kind of have this squiggly line in the middle when we represent them in drawings. These mitochondria are in charge of turning glucose into energy. They're super freaking important. They take the glucose from the food and they do some magic and outputs energy. So you can do stuff like, I don't know, walk, run, think, whatever. So when a glucose spike happens, all of that glucose heads straight to the mitochondria because that's where it gets processed, right? And your mitochondria, unfortunately, while they like a steady influx of glucose, during a spike, when you give them way too much glucose way too quickly, they kind of like shut down. They're like, TMI, I cannot, too much information, like I can't deal with this. They sort of go on strike. They get stressed out, and they kind of break down. So that's a real problem because you just ate all this food because you were like, I want to give my body energy, right? Sugar in the morning, energy. Actually, on the inside, your mitochondria, the very things responsible for making energy, they break down when you give them too much glucose to handle. So that's the first thing that happens. And when your mitochondria break down, it increases how much stress there is in your body. And it increases that thing we talked about, inflammation, which is not good and creates a lot of like terrain for a lot of diseases to happen. So that's the first thing that happened. Glucose spikes, mitochondria break down, and you get tired. Not good. Second thing that happens is this thing called glycation that I explained, which is aging. The more spikes you have, the more glycation happens quickly, the faster you age. On the outside with your wrinkles, but also on the inside. So the kayak when you're 65 is going to get harder and harder the more glycation happens when you're young, for example. And then finally, so your body really wants to keep you alive. As I mentioned, like your body is pretty freaking awesome and it's really trying to protect you. And so it has a technique that it deploys when a glucose spike is happening to get that level of glucose down, because it knows like, oof, when glucose is very high, like all this bad stuff happens. So let me get that to go down. Your body releases something called insulin, which comes from your pancreas. And we love insulin. She's dope. She grabs all the extra glucose and she stores it away into your muscles, into your liver, and into your fat cells. And that's one of the ways that you gain fat on your body, is by having insulin take this extra glucose and store it away.
You wrote a book called The Glucose Revolution, The Life-Changing Power of Balancing Your Blood Sugar. You wrote that book last year. Why did you write a book about glucose? Of all the things in health and food you could have written about, why glucose?
Right? It's so interesting. Essentially, after having this realization that I needed to figure out how my body worked, I went on like a quest, with different chapters. And so first chapter was, I was living in London before I was studying mathematics. And I moved to Georgetown in the US, Washington, D.C. to study biochemistry in grad school, to learn about how the body worked. And then I went to Silicon Valley to work in genetics because I wanted to understand our DNA. I was trying to like piece together as much as I could to try to understand how my body functioned. So that I could feel better, so that in the morning I could wake up not terrified of being alive. That was the bar, the bar was quite low. And even though DNA and studying it was interesting, your DNA doesn't give you a lot of information about what you need to do to feel good. Your DNA can tell you, where you're from, what your traits are, maybe if you have an increased risk of a disease in the future, but your DNA doesn't tell you exactly what you need to do. What really matters more in terms of determining how we feel on a daily basis and how quickly we age and if we can just still kayak when we're 65 has much more to do with how we live, how we eat, how we move, our environment, what we do. So I learned that as I was in this genetics company. And when I was there, something incredible happened. I discovered the world of glucose. And now I'm talking about this, on a daily basis and writing books about it. I discovered that my mental health got worse when my glucose, also known as blood sugar, was not healthy, steady, and balanced. I discovered that when my blood sugar levels were kind of like a roller coaster, these episodes of depersonalization happened much more frequently. There was even this one instance where I was able to see my blood sugar levels with a glucose monitor that I wore for a couple of weeks. I was able to see one of the spikes in blood sugar actually triggering the episode. I was like, whoa, I'm finally understanding a clue. How I'm eating and how that affects my glucose levels is then in turn affecting how I'm feeling and my mental health. And for me, that was like the jumping off point. I was like, whoa, this is fascinating. And I just dove really deep into it. And I studied it, for 4 years. I've been talking about it for that long and ended up writing a book about it because it's actually really important for all of us to know about this molecule and to learn to manage it.
They call you the glucose goddess.
I call myself the glucose goddess.
And now they call you the glucose goddess.
Yes, exactly. I wanted to find a catchy name after, 2 years talking about this on social media. at first my account was just my name, Jessie Inchauspé, which is really hard to write and pronounce and spell. So I needed a catchy name. So I was like glucose girl, glucose gal. And then I thought glucose goddess.
You said there that, watching your glucose monitor, presumably on your phone, it was connected to your phone, you could identify that the causation between a spike in your glucose and mental health implications. But, okay, why else does glucose matter?
Yeah, it's a very good question because, not everybody has these depersonalization episodes. So when I first got that piece of information, I was like, okay, glucose is affecting how I'm feeling. Let me see in the scientific papers, what else does glucose matter for? And I went into like a massive deep dive into all of the scientific studies about glucose that I could find. I had like 1,000 tabs open on my computer browser. I just went really, really, really deep. And I discovered some amazing things. So first, I discovered that I was not alone, that most people who don't have diabetes still experience these blood sugar spikes, potentially on a daily basis without knowing it. And that's a really good piece of information because for years we thought only if you have diabetes should your glucose levels be of any concern to you. It was kind of like either you have diabetes and need to learn how to manage glucose, or you don't have diabetes and like don't even worry about it. Now we know that everybody can be suffering from these spikes without knowing it. So that was a huge revelation for me. And that study was very recent. I think it was from 2018. So when I discovered it, 4 years ago, it had just come out. So I was like, whoa, like stuff is changing on this topic. We're realizing the importance of it for everybody. Second, I was like, okay, let's look at all the symptoms that are associated with these spikes from the scientific studies, right? So the most common symptoms of glucose spikes are things like cravings for sweet foods.
Yeah.
Multiple times a day.
You looked at me as if you know that I have that problem, and you're right. But you should have just said it. I don't like it being indirected.
No, I was just curious. Like,
no, you were looking at me because you knew,
too?
and it's fine. You probably heard me talk about the sweet drawer in my house that I used to have. It's gone now, but none of us are perfect, Jessie.
I'm not perfect either.
When you say cravings, does that kind of explain why when I have one cookie, I don't have cookies these days. I'm a changed man. But say I were to have one cookie, why I then want another cookie?
Yes.
But sometimes I'm a changed man. Sometimes I'll get into a cookie week.
Ooh.
Where like I have a cookie on Monday. And because I've had that cookie on Monday, like Tuesday I'm showing up, or Wednesday I'm showing up for a cookie.
Wow.
And then I can fall out of a sugar cycle where, because I've not had sugar in a while, I don't want sugar.
Yeah.
So what I'm asking there is, does that sugar craving, how long does that last? How do I get?
Question.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I've wondered if it was like a couple of days, like if I've not had sugar for 3 days, then I don't have the cravings anymore. Or is it shorter than that?
Well, listen, from the studies, we know a few things. We know that one, like if you have a cookie, so cookies contain, sugar and starches. And sugar and starches are what increase your glucose levels in your blood. So when you have a cookie, up, glucose spike, okay? Increase in concentration, and then a glucose drop. After the spike. This drop has been shown to activate the craving center in your brain, literally telling you, Steven, find something else to eat that's sweet ASAP.
Go back to the drawer.
Yeah. So your brain controls that part of your psyche. Like your brain is telling you to go find something else that is sweet. And so when people have cravings, they often may feel something like, oh, I feel guilty. I feel ashamed. I have no willpower. Like I'm so weak. I'm like, no. It's not your fault. It's absolutely not your fault. The craving you're experiencing now might have been caused, usually by breakfast, by the way, by the breakfast that you had or the thing you ate a couple hours ago. And I call that sort of starting the sugar addiction cycle, right? So let's say it's just one day, you have the cookie, spike, drop, you crave something else. Then if you keep having spikes for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, it's very possible that on day 4, that particular drop for some reason is making you want to have a cookie. Most of us are on this glucose roller coaster and have cravings multiple times a day.
I knew it wasn't my fault.
It's not your fault, babe. It's not your fault.
I knew it wasn't my fault.
It's not your fault. And then something else that makes that even less your fault is that when we eat something sweet, it releases a molecule called dopamine in our brain. And dopamine is a pleasure molecule. It's the molecule that gets released when we have sex, when we play video games, when we do like illegal drugs. Humans love dopamine. And so when you eat sugar or something sweet, it's a really easy way to get a hit. And dopamine is addictive. So you have those two things happening that definitely, you know, when you cut out sugar completely, you realize those cravings go away because you no longer have the spikes and the dopamine addiction going on.
Some people will hear that and go, it sounds like my body is sabotaging me. Do you see what I mean? It's 'cause that's kind of how
Absolutely. And that breaks my heart. Your body just wants you to stay alive. Like your body is not sabotaging you. But unfortunately, when we don't realize that the way we're eating is causing some of these symptoms, we might feel like our body is fighting us. We might feel like, oh, my body hates me. My body's always doing this, blah, blah. I'm like, listen, your body is speaking to you. All those symptoms you're feeling, those cravings, the acne, the, you know, irregular energy levels, all these hormonal issues, whatever, those are actually messages coming from your body telling you, hey, Steven, there's a glucose roller coaster happening here. Like, help me fix it. I think your body wants you to work in partnership with it and is trying to alert you with all of these symptoms. So instead of like blaming our body or feeling like, bad body for doing this and that, if you shift it a little bit, you're like, okay, let me balance my glucose levels and learn how to do this in an easy way. And then as you balance them, you see that all these symptoms go away and you feel like, oh, I'm a friend with my body now. I'm taking care of it. It's taking care of me. And that was a big realization for me in my health journey. Because when I was having those mental health issues, I felt exactly like that. I was like, why is this happening? Like, what did I do? You know? And it was actually my body trying to tell me that there was lots of things that were going wrong. One of them being my glucose levels. So anyway, yes.
Am I right in thinking that my body is not built or designed for the world that it currently lives in, and that's part of the battle? Like,
absolutely. Because just if you look at, for example, glucose levels, right? Like the way nature intended us to consume glucose was in plants, right? And when we consumed something sweet, it was usually in a piece of fruit. But pieces of fruit back in the day when nature created them, they were much smaller, much less sweet. They had way more seeds and fiber in them. So it didn't create that big of a glucose spike. But human beings, because of this desire for sweetness and pleasure, have been breeding plants and fruit to be extra sweet, extra juicy. So the bananas and the oranges you see today are not natural at all. They're the result of millennia of breeding. A little bit like how we took gray wolves and we bred them into chihuahuas. For fun, basically. Chihuahuas are not like natural animals, right? They're the result of breeding. We did the same thing for a lot of pieces of fruit. And then humans were like, how can we make this go even further? How about we extract the sugar from the fruit, get rid of all that fiber and water stuff, and concentrate it into table sugar? And then how about we put that in drinks and make like sodas or fruit juice, you know? So as human beings, we've created a food landscape that is 100% causing all these glucose spikes. And my philosophy today is not get rid of sugar, don't eat sugar anymore. I'm more like, okay, sugar is everywhere. We love it. It gives us pleasure. Let's learn to eat it in a way that doesn't cause these spikes and doesn't harm our physical and mental health so much.
We're going to get into exactly how to do that. I want to go a little bit back upstream. We were talking about the symptoms.
Absolutely.
So you've covered the cravings. Mm-hmm. Give me some of the short and the long-term symptoms of the glucose spikes. Roller coaster. And then I want to know what glucose is, because that's probably a better place to start.
No, I think symptoms is cool because most people will recognize a lot of these in their own lives. So cravings is the most common one. Then unsteady energy levels. So feeling tired throughout the day, maybe you have chronic fatigue, maybe you need a lot of coffee to get through the day, you know, maybe playing with your kids is exhausting, picking up the groceries is exhausting, just like you're tired. You know, you're eating, but you're tired. Very common symptom. And we'll get into why that happens maybe in a bit. Those are the two most common short-term ones. Then...
what about memory?
That's a good question. So the more glucose spikes you have, the more the neurons in your brain are going to work like less well. So one of the most common symptoms of glucose spikes on the brain is actually brain fog. Okay. So feeling like you can't really remember stuff too well. Everything's a little bit blurry. That's basically your neurons not being able to communicate as quickly as they usually do. And it's often felt as brain fog. But then there's a huge link between glucose and long-term brain problems like dementia and Alzheimer's. Some people even call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because it's so linked to your glucose levels. So the brain, if you want your brain to be in optimal top shape, steadying your glucose levels is really key.
What if I want to sleep like a baby?
Yeah, absolutely also. So the more spikes you have, the less restful and deep your sleep will be. So if you want to sleep like a baby, absolutely. If you're somebody going through menopause and you want to reduce menopause symptoms, also looking at your glucose levels is a very important place to start, because the more spikes we have, the worse those symptoms get. Talking about hormones, there's also a huge link between glucose levels and fertility. So in females today, there's more and more rates of infertility. There's something called polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is more and more common. That also is extremely linked to your glucose levels. And again, the first place to look if you want to fix your hormones is balancing your glucose. Other stuff, and there's a lot of symptoms here because glucose affects every single system in the body. So there's not a single disease or condition that doesn't get better when you balance your glucose levels, essentially. But I'll go into a few more examples. Skin. So inflammation is a direct consequence of glucose spikes. And on the skin, inflammation can be seen as acne, eczema, psoriasis.
I have no idea. There's two words that have just exploded into like popular conversation over the last, I'm going to say 12 months. But, I'm not that deep to know how long this conversation's been happening. But one of those words is the word glucose. I've just seen it everywhere all of a sudden. And the second word, which I've seen even in more places, is that word you just used, inflammation.
Yeah.
What is inflammation?
Inflammation is a stress response from your body that is supposed to help you and clean things up. So for example, when you get sick, when there's a virus or a bug that's attacking you, your body essentially creates inflammation to combat that enemy. The problem is inflammation now often happens against your own body or just like chronically at a low level, and that causes many, many, many issues. So it's a state of stress of the body.
And it happens in all of us. It can happen in all of the cells in our body.
Absolutely. And today, 3 out of 5 people in the world will die of an inflammation-based disease.
3 out of 5?
3 out of 5. The World Health Organization calls inflammation like one of the biggest problems of our century. It's basically just a way to say that your body is not healthy. There's problems going on within. Because inflammation can be caused by so many things, by like smoking, alcohol, glucose spikes, stress, environmental toxins. It's just like a state of unhealth of your body, if you will. And so on the skin, the most common sort of visible consequences of that inflammation are acne, psoriasis, eczema. And then talking about skin, so the more glucose spikes you have in your body, the faster you age. And that shows on your skin as wrinkles, but also on the insides. Things slowly deteriorate and break down. And there's a funny image for this. So from the moment you're born, your body is slowly cooking. You slowly cook, let me explain, like a chicken in the oven from the moment you're born. And then when you're fully cooked, you die. Your face. This concept of cooking is basically aging, and it's the technical term for it is called glycation. And the more glucose spikes you have, the faster this process happens. So if you want to age less quickly, and if, when you look at 2 people who are 65, one is clearly younger than the other, like biologically, right? And you can impact how quickly that aging is going on. One of the ways being through reducing your glucose spikes. Okay, and then long term, we talked about type 2 diabetes being the leading sort of long-term condition linked to glucose levels. So the more glucose spikes you have, the faster you'll develop prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. And then finally, I'll also mention that glucose levels are linked to cancer and heart disease. So essentially, to give you a summary, if you have a lot of glucose spikes, things are not going to go super well. You're going to have lots of symptoms, short term, medium term, long term. If you currently feel, if you're like, I could feel better than I do, which most of us probably feel, then balancing your glucose levels is a really, really freaking important place to start. It's like the base layer of your physical and mental health. It's really key. But most of us don't have that sorted.
So to summarize, there's short and long-term symptoms there that I've written down here. Short-term symptoms, if we aren't able to flatten our glucose levels, then we face the chance of having constant hunger and cravings, chronic fatigue, poor sleep, colds. You talked a little bit about the immune system and the implications there. Brain fog, you described it as long-term brain fog. Longer-term effects, acne, aging, arthritis, Alzheimer's, dementia, cancer risk, mental health, infertility challenges.
Yeah, and to be clear, like glucose is not everything, right? There's many things that matter in our health, like emotional connection, medical care, you know, sleep, stress, exercise. But learning to balance your glucose levels is like learning. Okay, I have a fun image to use for this. It's like, imagine you're walking into an airplane, and before you go sit at your seat, you kind of peek into the cockpit, and you're like, whoa, lots of buttons in that cockpit. On the ceiling, on the sides, there's all these levers. You're like, oh, I'm happy I don't have to fly this plane. You're the passenger, right? And you're happy the pilots know what they're doing. In the case of our body, it's interesting because we're both the passenger. We feel what's going on, you know, we're kind of victims to what's going on, but we're also the pilot. We're in charge of our decisions. We decide what we eat, what we do, but often we have no clue how to fly the plane. We have no idea how our body works. So it becomes very complicated to figure out where to start. And we have all these opinions, this marketing, blah, blah. And it can be really confusing and quite daunting. So to me, learning to balance your glucose levels is like learning about the most important lever in the cockpit of the plane. It's like, if you know about this lever, you can take off, you can fly, you can land. It's like the most important thing. And it will help you get to a point where you're kind of cruising and you're like, okay, I kind of have a handle on things. My symptoms are kind of getting better. So to me, that's the way to think about it.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.